It was his eyes that stopped me first. Deacon Raymond looked at me as if I were an insect under glass, small, brown, unreadable. I stood at the altar rail with my hands cupped the way I always had, the pearl necklace heavy against my throat, and his gaze felt like a hand pressing my chest. My family sat a few pews back. The whole church seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved past me and laid the host in someone else's palm. He ignored me. I remember the morning so clearly. I woke at 5 like I always do on Sundays. The kettle clicked on. I smelled coffee and the lemon-scented cleaner I kept for the polished oak table. I smoothed my navy dress with the same small, careful movements I'd used for 30 years, brushed my silver hair, and fastened the pearls George gave me on our 30th anniversary. They still had the faint smell of his aftershave when I touched them. I put the hymnal in my lap out of habit before I even left the house. St. Augustine has been my second home for as long as I can remember. On the way in, the parking lot smelled of cut grass and car exhaust, and the bell over the narthex chimed 3 times. But today faces shifted when I walked down the aisle. Martha Jenkins glanced away. The prayer circle I coordinated for 15 years folded itself into conversation for 2. My hymn book shook in my hands. The paper edges felt thin and brittle, like the underside of a dried leaf. "Good morning, Eleanor," Father Thomas said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "We need to speak after Massachusetts. About your situation." Those words landed like stones. My heart thudded. I felt the blood rush to my ears. David leaned forward from the pew behind me and squeezed my hand. Jessica whispered, "Are you all right?" And I pressed my fingers into hers so she wouldn't see how I pressed my lips together to keep from crying. During the homily, Father Thomas spoke about integrity and the dangers of gossip. He didn't look at me, yet every sentence sliced close. The air felt thick, as if the incense had become smoke that clogged my throat. My palms were damp against the hymnal. The preacher's voice, a steady practiced cadence, seemed to echo in the wood-paneled rafters and against the little gold cross resting heavy at my sternum. When communion began, the church filled with the soft shuffle of shoes on carpet and the rustle of hymnals being closed. My feet moved down the aisle on muscle memory. The smell of waxed oak and old polish wrapped around me. I could hear my son's shoes behind me, a protective rhythm. I stepped up to the rail and extended my hands. The pearls lay cool on my chest, the clasp cold under my fingers. Raymond's silence was a physical thing. He didn't hesitate because he'd missed me. He hesitated because he chose to look through me. I felt the entire congregation pivot toward the altar, the whispering like wind moving through wheat. Someone's cough. The scrape of a kneeler. David's voice, low and urgent, murmured, "Mom." I walked back to my seat with my legs weak and my breath coming short. The hymnal trembled in my hands as though it might blow away. A woman 2 pews over stared at the fabric of my dress, not my face. My cheeks burned. The taste of copper filled my mouth. I sat down and tried to breathe through the humiliation, the scent of incense now acrid. After Mass, Father Thomas asked me to come into his office. The carpet felt springy under my shoes. The sunlight through the blinds made stripes across the desk where my hands rested. Deacon Raymond sat there, hands folded as if in prayer, and Helen Fitzpatrick, looking more like a judge than the woman who ran the bake sale, watched me with narrowed eyes. "We received a complaint," Father Thomas said. His voice was quiet, but each word hit with awful clarity. "Someone reported seeing you with Richard Wilson. In compromising circumstances." My mouth went dry. For a moment I could only hear my own breath, the faint tick of the wall clock, the soft clink of the crucifix against wood when Father Thomas shifted. "Richard," I said. "He's been helping me with my estate planning for the nursing home fund." We were seen. Walking in the park, he was helping carry a box. He is gay. Everyone knows that. Helen's nails tapped the folder on her lap. Raymond's jaw was a hard line. The room smelled of old paper and the lemon cleaner from earlier. I unzipped my purse and pulled out a manila folder, the edges worn from being handled. Inside were bank statements, a draft of a trust, notes about the gift for Miller's Lodge, $50,000 earmarked for birthday flowers, for an extra Christmas dinner, for blankets. They had taken my life in pieces, my volunteer hours, the dinners planned for seniors, the quiet conversations at bedsides, and rearranged them into a rumor to suit their fear. I felt something cold pool under my sternum and then rise hot and bright. "You denied me the Eucharist," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "You humiliated me in front of my family based on gossip." Helen opened her mouth, then closed it. Raymond's eyes darted down to my pearls as if searching for evidence. Father Thomas sighed. He looked at me with that tired Irish sadness, and the room contracted around us. I laid the folder on his desk like a small, deliberate offering. "This was my secret," I said. "Not a scandal. A gift. I was going to announce it today." I stood up. My knees wobbled, but my spine was straight as I walked past them. The sunlight caught once more on the pearls at my throat, the same loop of luminous truth I had worn since George died. At the door I turned. "You can tell the parish council something else about my situation," I said. "Starting today, I am a Catholic without a church." The office door whispered closed behind me. Outside, the bell in the steeple rang once, a lonely note over the parking lot. The sound followed me into the cool afternoon and, for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of those pearls as a comfort rather than a chain. It was his eyes that stopped me first. Deacon Raymond looked at me as if I were an insect under glass, small, brown, unreadable. I stood at the altar rail with my hands cupped the way I always had, the pearl necklace heavy against my throat, and his gaze felt like a hand pressing my chest. My family sat a few pews back. The whole church seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved past me and laid the host in someone else's palm. He ignored me. "My loves, thank you so much for spending these few minutes with me. This channel is just getting started, and every new subscriber is a breath of life as we reach for our first 1,000. If this story moves you, please click subscribe, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. It helps us feel less alone. I can still see that morning as if it were painted on the inside of my eyelids. The kitchen was small and bright, sunlight pooling across the linoleum in a strip that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. I woke at 5 because that's what I've done for 30 years. The kettle clicked on, the radio murmured soft morning prayers, and I stood at the sink with my hands in warm water, feeling the little aches in my knuckles loosen as I prepared the cups. I smoothed my navy dress the way my mother taught me, fingertip checks at the collar, a small tuck at the hem. The pearls were the last thing I fastened. George gave them to me on our 30th anniversary. Even now when I touch them there's a ghost of his aftershave in the clasp. A private, comforting scent that steadies me. I put a small manila folder in my bag, the edges worn from being handled. It held the trust papers and the outline for the Miller's Lodge donation. $50,000, written in careful looping ink, meant to buy birthday flowers and a better heater for winter. It felt like a secret treasure that belonged to the people I loved. Down the block the church bells began their slow chime. 3 low peals that traveled through the neighborhood like a memory you can't quite place. I wrapped my coat around me and stepped out. The morning air had that late spring chill, damp with cut grass. The parking lot at St. Augustine smelled of asphalt warmed by the sun, and the faint sweetness of the hydrangeas by the front steps. There are ordinary smells that make a place home. The wax of the pews, the lemon oil we polish with, the candle smoke that hangs in the rafters, little things that have stitched me to that building. I arrived early. My habit was to sit in the third pew, where the light from the side window would hit my hymn book just right. Martha Jenkins usually left a program and a small handkerchief there for me. That morning the pew was oddly empty. There was a gap where her coat should have been, and a church bulletin folded perfectly as if waiting. For a second I thought perhaps she had gone. There's a rhythm to Sundays. I know the sound of the sacristy door, the shuffle of the server's shoes, the soft clack of hymnals being set into place. I know the smell of incense when it first releases, sweet, a little sharp, and how it makes the air hang heavier like a promise. I had coordinated the prayer circle for 15 years. I visited the sick on Thursday afternoons and sat with people who smelled of hospital soap and old perfume, and I've presided over more casseroles than I can count after funerals. Faith for me is not only a set of beliefs. It's the little ordinary duties that keep a community tethered. Driving Mrs. Alvarez to her appointments, baking bread for bereaved families, folding programs for Easter. That morning my hands trembled a little as I tucked the folder under my arm. I had stayed up late the night before making lists. The announcement to read after Father Thomas's blessing. The bulletin note that would not give away a thing. I wanted to surprise the council, to surprise them with care instead of spectacle. The idea of giving quietly, of letting the gift do the speaking, made me smile in a way children smile at a secret. On my way out of the sacristy I paused at the font. The water was still, the basin catching a reflection of the stained glass window, merry in blues and soft golds. A small ring of old coins lay in the bottom like tiny weathered promises. I touched the water with the tip of my finger and felt the coolness like a benediction. Then I walked back to my seat, the hymnal heavy in my lap, and waited for family to arrive. I loved these Sundays where third and fourth generations would squeeze into the pew behind me. David and Jessica and the little ones. How full my heart was that the house would be loud with their voices and the scrape of stroller wheels. There were tiny, almost invisible things that morning that later became loud in my memory. An extra hymn passed to me that I hadn't requested. Helen's glare as she crossed the aisle to speak to a man from the council. A pew near the back left conspicuously empty though the church would soon be full. I noticed them but I did not give them weight. I was focused on the warmth of the moment ahead. Announcing that Miller's Lodge would have its birthdays remembered. That lonely chairs would have a cushion at Christmas. I had faith that such kindness would be met with gratitude, not suspicion. I pressed the pearls against my throat once more and breathed in. There was peace, soft, fragile, settled across my shoulders. I did not know then how fragile that peace would prove to be. I did not know how quickly the sound of church bells could be swallowed by a hush. I only knew the small certainty of routine, of belonging, and of a secret gift folded like a promise inside my purse. When Father Thomas put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Eleanor, we need to speak after Massachusetts. About your situation." The words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples ran straight through me. My heart beat hard enough to hear it in my ears. My hands went cold. For a second I could not remember how to breathe. I sat through the rest of the service like I was watching from behind glass. Every word from the pulpit scraped against something raw inside me. I felt eyes in the back of my neck, like the press of winter air. My hymnal trembled in my lap. The smell of incense that usually felt like a benediction tasted of metal. When communion came, the world narrowed until all that existed was the path to the rail and the small polished face of Deacon Raymond. He had always been precise in his movements. That morning his hand moved past me. He looked at me, as if through me, and placed the host into someone else's palm. He chose to ignore me. I remember the weight of my pearls against my throat, the tiny metallic click of the clasp as I swallowed. My knees were suddenly soft. Behind me, David whispered something. "Mom!" But it was swallowed by the shuffle of the congregation moving on. I returned to the pew with my cheeks burning and my breath coming too fast. The hymnal felt like a thin shield I pressed to my chest. People shifted. A cough. A child's shoe scraping the floor. Martha's seat to my left was empty. The sanctuary seemed to hold its breath and measure my humiliation. After the final blessing, Father Thomas closed the book and nodded toward the sacristy. The office door smelled of lemon cleaner and old paper. Sunlight striped the carpet through the blinds. Deacon Raymond sat in the chair, as if he had been waiting for judgment. Helen Fitzpatrick folded her hands on her lap like a jury forewoman. They did not offer me the comfort of surprise. Their faces were composed, rehearsed. "We received a complaint," Father Thomas said. His voice was quiet, as though he were trying not to wake someone sleeping. "Someone reported seeing you with Richard Wilson. In compromising circumstances." The words blurred. My mouth went dry. The floor tilted. My hands, the same hands that had folded prayers at bedside and wrapped casserole dishes for grieving families, twitched at my knees. I felt like a child again at a priest's desk, only now the children's consolations were gone. "Richard," I said. The name lodged in my throat like a stone. "He's been helping me with the trust for Miller's Lodge. He's assisting me." "He is not." Helen's lips pressed thin. Deacon Raymond's jaw was a fixed line. Father Thomas blinked the tired, pastoral blink that used to reassure me. The room smelled of stale coffee and the faint perfume of authority. They had the look of people who had rehearsed their disbelief. They listened to the rumor more closely than they ever listened to me. That small, sharp pain under my sternum, where grief nests grew hot. The years spent folding bulletins and driving an aging neighbor to appointments and coordinating the prayer circle felt like something someone could pick up and rearrange into a lie. I unbuttoned my coat with hands that did not tremble as much as I felt. From the depths of my bag I pulled a manila folder. The paper was worn soft at the edges from being handled late at night, from rereading, from planning. I laid it on Father Thomas's desk like a small, steady declaration. "These are the trust documents," I said. My voice was low, and there was no tremor in it that I would not control. $50,000, earmarked for Miller's Lodge. Birthdays. Blankets. Heat for winter. I met Richard to sign these papers and to make arrangements. We walked in the park because he was carrying boxes of forms. That's the truth. They watched the papers as though they might sprout and bite. Helen's face went a color that frightened me. Disbelief that I could be that simple, or that they had been so ready to believe the worst. Deacon Raymond's eyes flicked to my pearls, as if the necklace could be read like a ledger of sin. Father Thomas looked older in that moment, the lines near his eyes deeper, as if the salt of the sea had shifted. "You denied me the Eucharist," I said. The words came out steady now, cleanly. "You humiliated me in front of my family because someone told a story, and no one thought to ask me." For a breath there was nothing but the quiet of paper shuffling. Then I closed the folder. I stood up. My knees felt like they would not know me if I wavered, but my back was straight. The pearls at my throat were warm from my skin. I slid the clasp into place with the movement that had been practiced for decades. George had given me those pearls. They had steadied me through widowhood, through bad winters, through quiet nights. They would not be what held me down now. "At the door," I said, and I heard the calm in my own voice. "You can tell the parish council something else about my situation. Starting today, I am a Catholic without a church." Then I turned. The office felt smaller as I walked out. The bell over the narthex chimed once. One clear note that cut through the afternoon air like a metronome. It followed me into the parking lot, where the heat of the sun made the asphalt smell like summer spent on this same ground. The chain of people behind me did not call. My family followed a few steps, eyes wide, holding one another's hands. I did not know in that moment whether I was stepping away from a home or stepping toward one. I only knew that I could not go back to being invisible under someone else's certainty. My decision had been made in that small office, at a desk lined with lemon cleaner and old paper, made from a place colder than anger and sharper than shame, the place where dignity lives when no one else will claim it for you. It was his eyes that stopped me first. Deacon Raymond looked at me as if I were a specimen behind glass, small, brown, unreadable. I stood at the altar rail with my hands cupped the way I always have, the pearl necklace heavy against my throat, and his gaze felt like a hand pressing my sternum. Behind me, my family sat a few pews back. "We received a complaint," Father Thomas said. His voice was too soft. "Someone reported seeing you with Richard Wilson. In compromising circumstances." The words landed like a struck bell. For a breath I only heard the tick of the wall clock and the far-off murmur of parishioners exiting. My hands, the hands that had baked casseroles and folded bulletins and smoothed hospital blankets, went suddenly small. "Richard." My voice came thin. "He's been helping me with the trust for Miller's Lodge. We were seen walking to the lodge because he was carrying boxes of forms. He is assisting me." Helen's smile thinned. Her eyes sharpened. She tapped a fingernail against a folder as if testing its weight. "The person who sent the complaint said they saw you holding hands," she said, each word measured. "Two witnesses." Raymond's jaw was a hard line. He didn't look at me. He looked at my pearls instead, like they might confess some hidden ledger. Father Thomas blinked, that weary, conciliatory blink he uses when he wants to manage pain without touching it. "Eleanor, we can't ignore a report like this," he said. "We have a duty." A duty. The room filled with that word until I could taste it, metallic and cold. It had been my duty to this parish for 30 years. It had been my duty to bring casseroles and to sit quietly in the back when grief was too heavy for words. Now the word folded me into suspicion. My hands moved before my breath caught up. From my bag I pulled the folder, my fingers knowing the creased edges like old scripture. I laid the papers on Father Thomas's desk. Bank statements. Drafts of a trust. Notes in my shaky handwriting. Miller's Lodge birthdays blankets. Heating fund. $50,000. The ink looked brighter in that office light, stubborn and clear. "These are the truth," I said. "I met with Richard to sign these documents. I was carrying boxes of forms. That's it." Helen's mouth made a small O. Raymond's eyes flicked briefly to the signatures and away again. There was a pause so long I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Father Thomas's hands were folded on his desk, knuckles pale. "You were denied communion," I said then, the words steady now, like placing stones across a stream. "You humiliated me in front of my family because someone told a story, and no one bothered to ask me." A flush crept up my neck. I could feel the prick of old indignations, the times I'd stayed late to count cookies after bake sales, the names I had whispered at hospital beds. All of it reduced to a rumor carried on some idle tongue. I saw in a blink, faces in pews turning the rumor into truth. I felt it as a physical thing, the air in my chest tightening. Helen leaned forward, the light catching the gold of her brooch. "We must consider the welfare of the parish," she said. Her voice was silk over steel. "Scandals. We must consider truth," I cut in, and my voice surprised me with how firm it sounded. The pearls at my throat seemed suddenly to be a small steady light. "This is not a scandal. It is a gift. I was going to announce it today." They watched the papers as if they might change shape. Raymond's fingers twitched on the arm of his chair, the only movement he allowed. Father Thomas looked tired in a way that made me ache for him. He had always been kind in the ways that mattered. Today kindness looked complicated, like a bridge with a missing plank. I stood up slowly. My knees were soft. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and old guilt. I walked toward the door with the folder under my arm and felt every eye in that office catalog me. The bowed shoulders, the pearls, the hands that had held so many others. "At the door," I said, my voice clear. "You can tell the parish council something else about my situation. Starting today, I am a Catholic without a church." The words hung there. For a second the office seemed smaller, as if the roof had lowered to listen. Then the door closed behind me and the corridor opened to sunlight. The bell over the narthex chimed once, a single honest note. Outside, my son's hand found mine. David's grip was solid, his eyes reflecting the same shock and a quiet fierceness I had taught him by accident, a fierceness that had nothing to do with the church and everything to do with what's right. Walking away felt like stepping out of a photograph that had been miscaptioned for years. My heart pounded, and the pearls tapped softly against my collarbone like a metronome. I did not know then if I was losing a home or finding one. I only knew I would not be made small by someone else's certainty. Later, we found a smaller parish where people listened more than they judged. The new congregation didn't know my history. They learned it in the work. Flowers for Mrs. Alvarez, drives to doctor appointments, casseroles folded into warm hands. The rumor faded there like morning mist. My children stood by me. My faith, messy, stubborn, alive, remained. No one could take that from me. Some mornings I still wake and touch the pearls, and the ghost of George's aftershave is there. I think of that day at St. Augustine as a photograph with a tear down the corner. I keep it not as evidence of harm, but as proof that dignity can be reclaimed slowly in small stubborn acts of kindness. They say the smallest betrayals begin as whispers. In my case, they started in the pews like a low wind moving through paper. At first it was only a look. A pause where a handshake used to be. Then the look became a turn of a head. Then the hand was gone entirely. The Sunday after the office meeting, the third pew where I always sat was empty. Not because someone else claimed it, but because people had rearranged their lives around a rumor. Martha Jenkins, who had saved that spot for me for 20 years, slid into the pew 2 over and pretended not to see me when I walked in. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes fixed on the hymn board as if the words could block what she knew. During coffee hour, the kitchen was a clatter of paper plates and polite distances. Plates were set down a little further away from mine. Conversations folded closed when I approached. Someone, never anyone I would have suspected, asked loudly about the raffle baskets as if to change the subject. The smell of coffee was sharp under the fluorescent lights, and it felt like an accusation. People who had once leaned into me with secrets and grief now leaned away. My phone buzzed less. Calls that used to come in like clockwork, requests for a casserole, a ride to a doctor's office, a note about an upcoming committee vanished. I left messages and found my voicemail full of other people's concerns. I waited by the receiver like a child at a window. There were practical slights that stung as much as the whispers. The prayer circle I had coordinated for 15 years met without me. No one told me they had reformed the roster. They simply placed a new name on the bulletin and handed it to the pews as if nothing had changed. The volunteers' sign-up sheet for the nursing home visits, one I had folded and refolded for years, was passed around with an embarrassed cough, and my name had been left off the list. Doors started closing. Not dramatic cinematic slams. Just small deliberate gestures. At the church bake sale, a woman I'd brought lemon squares to for decades excused herself to the restroom when I approached. At the parish hall, volunteers would move to the far side of the table as I reached for a platter. Once at the thrift sale, a door that usually opened wide when I arrived was shut by a woman in a cardigan before I could step inside. She smiled a practiced smile and said, "We'll call you," as if she were postponing a favor indefinitely. Neighbors who had dropped by for tea began to prefer the phone. Mrs. Alvarez, who used to leave a jar of marmalade on my porch, cut me a brief wave from her kitchen window rather than invite me in. The kids in the neighborhood, whose parents I'd driven to Sunday school for years, stared at me as if I were a story with missing pages. A little boy clutched his mother's hand and looked at the ground when I spoke to him. Even during weekday errands, the parish rumor trailed me. The clerk at the post office avoided my eyes when she handed me the stamp book. The woman at the grocery store pretended not to see me in the cereal aisle. And when I passed the parish bulletin board at the library, a fresh flyer about an upcoming concert had been tacked over the old one where my name had once appeared as a sponsor. Father Thomas was gentle in his distance. He offered condolences in hushed tones, his hand briefly touching my sleeve, then pulling back like a man who feared to stain himself. His kind eyes were tired in a way that suggested he had too many strings to mend and not enough hands. He said little, claiming the weight of my grandchildren fussed when I didn't sit with them. One of the little ones whispered, "Why won't they give Grammy the bread?" And I could feel the eyes of the congregation like nails. My son David stood up for me more than once, his voice low and steady, but the damage was already done. Courtesy survived. Warmth did not. What surprised me most was how quickly routine became an eraser. Names I had spoken every week stopped appearing in the pew beside me. Invitations to dinners where I had curated the playlist vanished from the calendar. The casserole chain, those quiet Sunday exchanges that wove our lives together, frayed in a matter of days. I am not a woman who thrives on being seen, but I had always needed to be known. Each small act of turning away felt like a tally against me. Decades of service quickly reduced to a single-line item on someone else's ledger. And so the siege tightened, not with shouting or banners, but with the silence between my neighbors and me. It was granular, slow, and everywhere. You begin to learn where the doors are that still open, and which ones now close without notice. I started to count the open ones. And there were fewer than I had imagined. The preacher's voice filled the nave like a bell. It wasn't loud, just that steady practiced vibration that slides along the rafters and comes back to you as something else. Accusation, maybe. Warning, maybe. Father Thomas spoke of truth and of trembling consciences. His words hung in the air and then rolled, echoing off the varnished wood of the pews. Each integrity and accountability beat against my ribs like a hand knocking from the inside. I could feel the hymnals under my palms, the paper edges soft with years of Sunday mornings. My hands were clasped together, fingers interlaced so tight the knuckles blanched white. I told myself to breathe. Slow even. In, out, in, out. My breath was a small metronome against my sternum, trying to keep time while the sanctuary held its collective breath. There was incense, thin and sweet, braided through the sermon. It smelled like memory. Hospital rooms where I'd sat with the dying, like the shawls I'd wrapped around those same hands. The wood of the pulpit smelled of lemon oil and old polished prayers. Warmth from the morning sun spilled through the side window in a slow wedge, lighting motes that danced like tiny absolutions or tiny accusations, hard to tell which. Somewhere in the middle of the homily a candle guttered. I didn't notice it at first, only that the light on the altar dimmed a touch, as if someone had turned down a dimmer on the whole room. A breeze, maybe from the sacristy door, found it and the wick went blunt and sudden. The flame sighed and then was gone. The absence of that small light felt larger than the candle itself. For a heartbeat the altar seemed naked. Behind me my son's shoe scraped, nervous. I felt David's hand press once into the small of my back. Reassurance, muscle answering muscle, then still. The children shuffled, whispered. Somewhere the baby squawked and was soothed. The congregation's murmurs were tiny waves. Eyes moved. Heads angled. The church became 100 little pivoting statements. And then there were Deacon Raymond's eyes. They found me like a pinprick of cold. He looked not at me with pity or worry, but with a decision folded into his expression. When I stepped forward to the rail, my palms opened the way they always had. The pearls at my throat were heavy, the clasp cool and familiar against my skin. I extended my hands and waited. He didn't look away because he didn't have to. He looked straight through me. The tilt of his chin was deliberate, a small, practiced movement. He placed the host in the hands of the person beside me, the elderly man with the tremor in his hand, and made a sign that said without words, "Move on." The sound of the host against the other hand was absurdly loud in that silence. It echoed. My hands lingered in the air for a breath that felt like a year. Time pooled there, warm and humiliating. Breath kept catching behind my teeth. The hymnal slipped between my fingers and fell soundless to my lap. I could hear my heart, a relentless small thing pounding under the pearl strand at my throat. Someone cleared their throat. A cough, polite and ill-timed. The pew behind me shifted as if surprised by a new weight. My grandchildren looked up, small faces round and confused. "Grammy," one whispered, and the word landed like a stone. My son leaned forward. He mouthed, "Mom." So quiet I could only feel the vibration. I walked back to my seat with my legs like a woman learning to walk again. The wood of the kneeler felt sharp under my palms. The air was cooler in the pew, like a room exhaled. People's faces were unreadable. Some were blank statues of devotion. Some were canvases where curiosity was still drying. Martha, who used to save a spot for me, looked at the hymn board as if it had answers. Helen Fitzpatrick's eyes slid across the pews like a ruler measuring distance. As I sat, the altar became a stage for little betrayals. A brass crucifix, the one that always hung a little crooked above the tabernacle, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt, enough to make the silver corpus catch the light and then clatter softly as it moved. The sound was like a coin dropped in a jar. People looked up. The rustle of pages masked the click. Yet I felt the gravity of that small clink as if it were a verdict. I tried to steady myself. Fingers unclenched. Breath slowed and then betrayed me with a hiccup. I tasted metal, fear, shame on my tongue. The pearls against my skin felt suddenly exposed, like an old memory held up for inspection. My calendar of service, prayer circle visits, bake sales, flashed across me in a reel of small, ordinary mercies. Years reduced to rumor. The thought made my throat ache. Father Thomas's voice returned, gentler now, the cadence of a man trying to navigate a cracked window. He spoke of compassion, of judging less, of carrying one another's burdens. The syllables had the weight of what could be. But words come after things are done. The flame on the altar had gone, the crucifix had moved, and a man in a gold-pinned diaconal badge had decided my worth for a handful of seconds in full view. When the final blessing started, the organ swelled and filled the gaps where conversation should have been. I felt the church breathe out. My family rose around me. Jessica's hand found mine, small and warm. David's shoulder pressed to mine like an anchor, and still the room did not return to its old shape. The light on the altar stayed a shade lower. The empty space where the candle had been seemed to hum. I walked out of the pew that day feeling the press of 100 small silences behind me. The bell over the narthex gave a solitary toll as I passed. It sounded like an answering question. The flame had gone out. Something else had shifted, a hinge, a seam. I did not know then if it was breaking or opening, only that it would not be the same. I laid the manila folder on Father Thomas's desk like a small, deliberate defiance, and watched the way the light caught the ink. The papers did what words had failed to do. They stopped the room. For a second there was only the tick of the wall clock and the faint smell of lemon cleaner. Raymond's hand twitched on the armrest. Helen's perfect fingernails hovered over the edge of the desk, as if she might close the world with a single motion. "This is the trust," I said. $50,000 for Miller's Lodge, birthdays, blankets, heat. My voice surprised me by staying steady. The folder felt warm where my palm pressed it. The sound of the pages being smoothed was absurdly loud. They read it like something foreign. I could see them trying to rearrange their suspicions into facts that matched the paper, looking for a missing comma, an altered signature. Instead they found my handwriting. Messy, deliberate, the same loops I'd use for casserole lists and prayer requests. The details were there, bank statements, drafts, notes. Nothing sensational. Everything reasonable. Father Thomas's face shrank into that tired pastoral expression I knew so well. He shifted in his chair, hands folded, looking more exhausted than reproachful. Helen's mouth made a small round shape, surprise or the shock of seeing herself wrong. Raymond's eyes flicked to my pearls, then to the signatures, and something like the first thin edge of shame passed through his face. He did not apologize. He did not need to. The admission lived in the pallor of his cheeks and the way his shoulders slumped ever so slightly. "You denied me communion," I said. And the words were not an accusation so much as a small accounting. You humiliated me in front of my family because no one thought to ask. In the weeks that followed, the rumor did what rumors always do. It scattered and lost shape. People talked less about me, more because the story had been complicated by facts than because they had any better need to be kind. Some doors stayed closed. I expected that. The truth was not a key that opened every lock. It was simply a refusal to keep living a lie. The best part of the resolution came quietly and, in a way, predictably. I went to Miller's Lodge. I sat with Sister and in the small, warm dining room where the residents ate their lunches by 2 o'clock. The blankets I'd paid for were folded at the foot of beds. A new heater hummed softly in the corner. On the residence board in the hallway, somebody had pinned a calendar note. June birthdays. Flowers from the Davidson Fund. I felt my throat tighten in a way that was not shame but something softer, like gratitude landing in a dry field. When Mrs. Garrison lifted the bouquet I had insisted the director buy with the first check, her hands trembled and she said, "They smell like the church." And I realized how right that was. My idea of church had always been those small things. A hot meal, a new blanket, a hand held in the dark. Not the architecture, not the committees that tidy reputations. The flowers smelled like that prayer I kept offering. That people be fed, warmed, remembered. A few folks from St. Augustine heard the truth. They did not march back to kneel at my feet. They made small, awkward gestures. Martha sent a note with a hymn marked inside, simple and human. Father Thomas called once, voice low and careful, and said he was sorry in the way a man who loves a place more than he can govern himself might be. He didn't ask me to return. He didn't try to smooth the hurt with platitudes. He simply offered a quiet regret and left the rest to stand or fall. Raymond never apologized. He did not need to for me to reclaim what had been lost. His refusal had been a moment, and moments, however public, do not get to keep a life. Helen continued to run things in her exacting way, and I, for the first time in decades, was no longer folded into the parish's ledger. I learned how to be small in some places and large in others. I found a new congregation, smaller, with a choir that sang like the people who still understood that charity is mostly practice, not declaration. People there asked my name and then asked what I liked for coffee hour. They invited me to bring flowers to the altar even before I had thought to offer them. I baked a lemon cake for a fundraiser and watched as it disappeared in good company. The bell in that church has a different tone. It rings like someone calling the faithful, not the certain. At night, I touch the pearls George gave me and remember the clasp of his hand. Sometimes I still wake, and for a split second the whole of that Sunday returns. The silence, the glance that cut. But then I breathe and the memory softens. I am not naive. I know people will gossip and councils will convene and fear will dress itself in piety. But I also know now in a way that's bone deep that faith is not owned by a building. It is practiced in small stubborn acts of care. The folder I left on Father Thomas's desk did not change every mind. It didn't have to. It changed one life, the life it was meant to change. Miller's Lodge has warmer nights now. There are birthday cakes and a drawer of new blankets. That, more than vindication, is the kind of justice that settles in the chest and stays. So I walk into a smaller church with the same old hymn book and a quieter heart. I go to the sick. I fold programs. I teach the children the odd, important things about how to make a casserole that won't fall apart. And when I stand to receive communion there, people meet my eyes. They know me not as a rumor but as a neighbor. The host is placed in my hand like a recognition. I cup it and feel a warmth that has nothing to do with ritual and everything to do with being seen. You can close a door on someone's habit of belonging, but you cannot keep them from offering bread. That is where my faith lives now, in the small stubborn mercy of action. The last image of St. Augustine that stays with me is a pew, empty where I used to sit. It's the third from the aisle, sun fading across the varnish, a hymn book left open as if someone might return to the page. I can still see the faint indentation in the wood where my hand would rest. It looks smaller than I remember, like a chair in a photograph trimmed at the edges. That empty bench is a quiet thing. And it keeps returning to me. I walk by it sometimes in the mornings when the light is thin. The church door is heavy under my palm. The brass handle has a warmth from other hands, and for a moment I imagine the people who passed before me, each with a small private business of prayer. The bell in the steeple lifts a note that finds a seam in the sky. It's the same bell that tolled the morning I left. This time it sounds less like a question and more like a marker. My feet know the route. Down the center aisle, past the stained glass where Mary watches in blues and golds, to the little chapel off to the side where the light is softer. There is a different congregation now, smaller, with faces that do not carry the weight of my history at St. Augustine. They look at me not through a ledger but through curiosity. They learn my name slowly, like learning the lines of a new hymn. When I pass the plate, they fold their hands and offer a nod that feels like a recognition, not a reckoning. The pearls still sleep at my throat. I turn them sometimes when nobody is watching. They are a small consistent sound, the click of a clasp, the whisper of beads. George's aftershave is only a memory in the metal of the clasp, but the scent lingers in my fingers when I breathe in hard. They are both a comfort and a story I tell myself when the old shame rises. The strand is not a didactic thing. It is the weight of years, the union of a life that kept giving even when doors closed. At Miller's Lodge, the new heater hums in the evening like a contented animal. Blankets fold at the foot of beds, soft edges catching lamplight. I find myself tracing those stitches, how someone stitched a blanket, how someone else placed a flower on a tray, and the world makes sense in small increments. Sister Ann eats too quickly and laughs syllables out of breath. Mrs. Garrison smells the bouquet every time and says, "They smell like the church." I tell her they smell like what the church should be, warmth and remembering. Her hands are still, and for a second both of us look like people who have received something larger than rumor. Sometimes I walk past St. Augustine on purpose, just to see how the light falls. There is a particular way the late afternoon tilts the steeple into shadow. When the doors are open I can hear organ practice drifting out, some adolescent voice trying to hold a phrase. Once or twice a parishioner I once knew has smiled, cautious, thin, and I have returned that smile from a place that does not demand repayment. The past is a hallway with doors. Some remain shut. Others I can open on my own terms. The day I left, the office smelled of lemon cleaner and paper. The sound of the bell outside the window was an incision on the afternoon. I remember walking out with the folder under my arm and my family behind me like a small armor. We moved through a parking lot that smelled of hot asphalt and cut grass. David's hand in mine was steady. He did not speak much then. He didn't have to. The silence between us was a readiness. There are nights when memory pulls hard. When I waken for a breath the whole of that Sunday comes back. The hush, the glance that cut, the host given to someone else. My throat tightens and I touch the pearls, remind myself of the folder on Father Thomas's desk, the check marks, the signatures that could not be argued away. The truth sits like a small stubborn coin in my palm. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. Simply is. I learned too that faith is more muscle than monument. You can stand under a roof and call it sacred until the timbers dry out. Or you can carry it in the way you answer the phone at midnight, in the casserole you warm and bring to a neighbor, in the hour you give to hold a small scared hand. My life has become that work, slow, ordinary, relentless. It does not headline. It mends. There is a particular sound I sleep to sometimes. Footsteps on a wooden floor. The measured tread of someone leaving. It's an ordinary sound, and it used to make me breathe shallow with fear. Now it is steady. Footsteps mean movement. They mean an ending and a beginning. The wind catches the door behind you and it closes with a soft, decisive click. You could stay and push the jamb back open. Or you could go forward. On quiet afternoons I sit on my new church's back pew and let the sun lay stripes across the hymn book. Children hand me their crayon drawings. A woman I barely know hands me a cup of coffee and asks if I will share the recipe for my lemon. The wind moves through the narthex sometimes in the evenings. It lifts the pages of the bulletin, catches a leaflet and sends it skittering across the floor. The door closes with a soft final sound, like a breath held and released. That sound is not a snapping shut. It is simply a mark. What was has been attended. What will be requires steps. My steps are not as confident as they once were, but they are mine. There is a kind of small peace in that, an ordinary ending that makes room. The empty pew, the sound of footsteps, the wind closing the door. They tell me one thing and one thing only. Something finished. Something else, quieter and truer, has begun. I walk into my small church now with my hymn book tucked under my arm and the pearls at my throat like a quiet punctuation. The room smells of coffee and sun through the windows, not of lemon oil and the hush that hides gossip. People here ask questions in the soft way neighbors do. What do you like for coffee hour? And when I answer, they listen as if words are the work, not the scandal. Some mornings I still wake to the memory of that Father's Day, Massachusetts. The hush, the way Deacon Raymond's eyes slid past me, the absurdly loud sound of the host placed in another hand. My throat tightens sometimes in that old accustomed way. Then I touch the pearls and breathe. The small click of the clasp is a rhythm I can count on. It steadies me. After I left St. Augustine, the folder on Father Thomas's desk did more for me than any sermon could have. I drove to Miller's Lodge and sat in a dining room that smelled of soup and polish, not rumor. Blankets I had paid for folded neatly at the foot of beds. A heater hummed in the corner like a contented animal. On the residence board someone had pinned a note. June birthdays. Flowers from the Davidson Fund. Sister Anne's laugh was quick and human. Mrs. Garrison cupped a bouquet and said, "They smell like the church." I realized then that church can smell like flowers and warm blankets, and someone's name read aloud at the table. Father Thomas called once after all of it. His voice low and full of that tired kindness. He didn't make excuses. He didn't offer to sweep things under a rug. He said he was sorry in the small human way he could manage. That was enough. Not every wound needs to be announced from the pulpit to be real. Sometimes a private apology will do. Raymond never apologized. Helen continued to fold herself into the parish like a neat paper program, her brooch catching light as if to prove nothing could stick. People who had once sat near me stayed away. Martha sent a hymn marked inside with a hand that shook a little. My phone stopped buzzing with casserole requests and prayer list additions. It rang instead when someone needed a ride and knew I would answer. In the spaces left by silence, I learned to keep offering what I always had. My time, my hands, the small mercies that don't ask for observation. A smaller congregation took me in. Their choir missed the grandeur of a cathedral voice, but their singing was honest and a little off-key in the most human way. They asked me where I liked to sit and then left a program on that pew. They let me bring flowers to the altar. Children pressed crayon drawings into my palm, as if folding me into their stories. Someone handed me coffee the first Sunday, and did not flinch when I told them why I left the other church. They heard me like people hear one another when they aren't trying to fit a story into a neat shape. Miller's Lodge warmed through the first winter with fewer shivers. I find myself checking that the blankets are folded, that Sister Anne has enough volunteers for game night, that Mrs. Garrison's birthday is marked. The work is ordinary and stubborn. It does not sing from a stage. It is a phone call at dusk to remind someone they are not forgotten. It is a casserole on a porch. It is, quietly, the thing that Thomas had been preaching: integrity, carried in the steady small gestures that make a community. People asked me once, when the rumor finally cooled, why I stayed as long as I did at St. Augustine. Because it was home, I told them. Because bricks and roofs and committees are nothing without hands. I wanted to be the hands. That answer felt true and also insufficient. Now I say it differently. I stayed because I believed the work mattered more than the worship space. I left when that belief was turned into gossip and spectacle. I keep working because the work is what faith looks like when you are not trying to be seen. There is a clarity that followed the humiliation, not a loud vindication, but a soft, persistent unpeeling. The truth was not a trumpet. It was a folder on a desk and a heater humming at Miller's Lodge. It was the sight of a blanket folded at the foot of a bed and a bouquet at a birthday table. Those things do not undo the sting of being ignored at an altar, but they settle something else. They prove where my devotion truly landed. My family held me steady. David's hand at my back that day in the pew, strong, certain, felt like a vow. Jessica's presence in the kitchen at Miller's Lodge as she helped unpack flowers felt like a new kind of liturgy. My grandchildren ask now, when we go to communion at the little church, why I smile when the host is placed in my hand. I tell them it is because I am being seen not by a crowd but by a community that knows me. Sometimes I pass St. Augustine on purpose. The late sun tilts the steeple into shadow and the hymn board hangs like a paused sentence. I walk on. The empty pew I left is just wood now. No longer an accusation but a place where someone else might one day sit. It is a memory with a small tear at the corner, one I keep not as proof of injury, but as a marker of what changed. Faith, I have learned, is not the building's approval. It is what you do with your hands when no one is watching. It is the folder on a desk that buys a heater, the blanket folded at a bedside, the flower placed on a plate. It is the quiet that follows rumor when you keep giving anyway. And my last secret, the thing I have tucked inside these pearls for years, is this: faith is what you give, not what they permit you to receive. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.